Good evening. We're going to get started. Thanks for coming tonight. My name is Mark Millett, and I am counselor at the high school for sophomore class. Last name's L through Z. And tonight we have Erica Henry, Associate Director of Enrollment Management from the University of Cincinnati here. And she's going to present on financial aid, what you need to know. I think this is your 4th year now, Erica. And so I think she's made this consistent because she's done a great job, and we are excited to have you back. And the setup for tonight is going to be going through the presentation, and then we will take Q&A. And we will be recording this, so we will put that up on the website, and we will also share the slides that were on the table back there as well. All right, Erica, it's all yours, Erica. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. As Mark said, this is my 4th year here, and it's good that he invites me back because that means that I'm not messing it up too bad, right? So that's a good sign to start with. But I was telling him earlier when I got here that this is legitimately one of my favorite places to come. I don't say that to just anybody, and I haven't said it yet this year. I've been to a couple schools, so if that tells you anything. It's one of those, like, if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it at all. So, but it is. This is one of my favorite places to come. You always have a great turnout. The parents that I talk with, you all are so invested in your child's education. I see some students out in the audience. This is probably the most students that I've seen at a presentation, so you're involving your students in the process. So it really is one of my favorite places to come, and so I appreciate Mark having me back again. So before I get started, there are a couple of disclaimers. I have disclaimers to my disclaimers. So we'll just keep this up. First, if you have heard me present before because you have an older child that is in college, the humor is just as bad. I might have gotten better at that humor, so something to look forward to. Second is, I love memes. So if you're looking through the presentation and you see memes, my disclaimer is, I did I'm in charge of the leadership class for our state professional association, and I was teaching at a workshop, I don't know, maybe a month or so ago, and the participants are like between 2 and 20 years in financial aid across the state of Ohio. And so it was really, the book that we were doing as a common read was a really great leadership book, really great material, but it was very academic. So it was kind of dry, right? So I was trying to come up with ways to kind of help them stay awake. And so I put some memes in the presentation, and like all of them were like, oh my gosh, you have to use memes in future presentations. So, disclaimer is, I was at a school last week, and I put memes in the presentation, and I told them to let me know if they did not like having the memes in the presentation. And I got positive feedback from it. So, if you do not like the memes, you can put it on the evaluation that they do not have. And you can also blame the parents at Wyoming, I'm just saying. I hate to throw out names, but for accountability purposes, parents at Wyoming. All right, so let's get started. Why I do what I do. I don't think I sent Mark the right presentation with the memes in it. So do you guys not have memes in your presentation? Mark, you let them down, buddy.
I'll put them on the website.
All right, now you have something to look forward to. All right, so this is where we insert this meme with minions. I love some minions, and there's like this look on their face, and they're like this. And it says, like, figuring out financial aid. So how many of you are like that? Like, this is really overwhelming for you. How many have had students that have gone through this process already? All right, so everybody else, all the people that have their hands raised, all right, you guys put them down. Those are all the people you need to ask questions. You know, if you have questions that's your people, that's your go-tos. All right, so I do what I do. And I've been doing this I've had 14 years in financial aid, I've been at UC for 10. It's not something you go, I know this is shocking, it's not something you go to college and say, I want to be a financial aid professional. I happened in financial aid when I started working in enrollment management as a student worker way back in 1996. Way back in the day, as the kids would say. So I started in enrollment management, made my way into financial aid. I was hooked, and here I am. And as I have gone through my career and made progressions in my career, I have had various touch points where I've realized it's just kind of affirmed that I made the correct decision. And one of the first was I was presenting at a state association conference, and there's a study called How America Pays for College. It's a study that's done every year. And in that study, 98% of families that were surveyed said they agreed that college is a worthy investment in their son or daughter's future, okay? 98% said college is a worthy investment. Out of that 98%, only 39% actually had a plan to pay for college. So while the 98% said it was a good investment, only 39% had a plan to pay. That, knowing that out of that 98%, 86% said from the time their child entered preschool, they knew that they would be going to college. So there's a big disparity there. So the need for financial education, financial aid education is important. It's great and it's important. And so that's basically, that's the biggest reason why I do what I do. And especially when I have the opportunity to come out to schools like this and be able to give, my goal is to kind of arm you all with the information, right? So that you can go out, share the information with your son or daughter if they're not here. And then as a family, make that educated decision about what's best for them and their future. So what are the goals of the Financial Aid Office? Our primary goal is pretty simple. So we have a pot of money, so whether that be from the Department of Ed, whether it be from the state of Ohio, or from our own institution. And we want to use that money to help students and their families pay for college. And we do that by first taking that pot of money, and our responsibility ethically is to make sure that we create a process that's as equitable as possible to help as many students as we can, and then follow that process. Along with that, we want to, we have different types of aid sources that we can distribute. And in most cases, or in all cases, we try to distribute that aid in the form of gift aid and in self-help aid. And we'll talk about what both of those are. So these first two that are on this list, these are the four main types of financial aid that your son or daughter will see, or some combination of these. The first two are what we would consider gift aid. So gift aid is aid that a student would get and wouldn't necessarily have to do anything in return for getting it, okay? This is aid that does not typically need to be repaid. And in this case, it would be scholarships, and we're going to talk about each of these more specifically, but in this case, it would be scholarships and grants, okay? In terms of self-help aid, so self-help aid is aid that a student would get, and essentially a student takes some responsibility for receiving that aid. So whether that's through the federal work program, in which a student has to work and get paid for the hours that they work, or whether it's through the federal loan programs. In that case, the student is borrowing and they're responsible for repaying whatever amount of loans that they borrow. In terms of grants, you'll hear us talk about need-based financial aid. So the good news is that there is aid that's available that's free. The bad news is that it's not based on what we think we need, right? The Department of Education is telling us what they think we need. And coming from experience, I'll tell you that doesn't usually match up. So one thing that we're good at in the financial aid profession is, so I want you to kind of stop me, yell at me, do whatever. We're really good, we have acronyms for everything. Like, I swear to you, we can have a whole sentence of just acronyms. The only thing that we do better is that we use these acronyms and we assume that you are going to know what we mean or what they stand for. Okay, so as we go through, I try to become very cognizant of using acronyms or not explaining them. If I fail at that, stop me and I'll go back and explain it, okay? In terms of need-based aid, there are two main federal grant programs. One is the federal Pell Grant, so that's probably the one that's the most familiar to you all. And then the other one is the FSEOG, or the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. Both of the eligibility for both of these aid sources are determined by the student's financial aid application results. So again, the Department of Ed is telling us what students are eligible for, and then we in turn tell the student what they're eligible to receive. In order to be eligible for both, a student must be an undergraduate student that otherwise meets the criteria that is enrolled in the first bachelor degree program, or first undergraduate degree program. So, for instance, if I'm eligible for the Pell Grant, my first bachelor degree, I get my first bachelor degree and I go back for a second bachelor degree, regardless of if I would otherwise be eligible, I can no longer get it, okay? Pell Grant is considered an entitled fund. So if a student is eligible to receive a federal Pell Grant, regardless of when they file their financial aid application, they will get that federal Pell Grant. The difference between that and FSCOG is FSCOG is considered a first come, first served fund. So essentially, at the university, we get this pot of money in form of an FSCOG. Oh, there we go, okay. In the form of an FSCOG. And again, it's our responsibility to come up with a process for delivering those funds or distributing those funds to students. We are doing so based on a first come, first served basis, according to the student's FAFSA filing date, and we'll talk more about what the FAFSA is. So as we go through and I'm talking about the FAFSA, you're going to notice that I'll say fill it out as soon as possible, fill it out as soon as possible. That is because in order for a student to get maximum aid consideration for any type of first come, first served aid sources, we're going to base that on the student's FAFSA filing date. The FSCOG, unlike the federal Pell Grant, is not an entitled fund. So once it runs out, it runs out. All right. The Ohio College Opportunity Grant, or OCOG, is a state grant, so it's awarded from the state of Ohio. Again, that's determined by a student's FAFSA filing status. If a student meets the eligibility criteria, they will get it, regardless of, there's actually one of the criteria is a FAFSA filing date, but as long as they're meeting that criteria and everything else, there's no such thing as running out of OCOG. And then federal work study is also a need-based fund. So students that are eligible, again, this is first come, first serve. Students that are eligible will automatically be awarded federal work study. Essentially, this is essentially like a part-time job for a student. So they get awarded federal work study as part of the financial aid award offer. For the student, they're working a part-time job. Could be on or off campus, depending on what opportunities the school has available. Essentially, though, for the student, you know, they're working, they're getting a paycheck just like they would any other job. A couple of differences, though, between just a regular part-time job compared to a work-study job. First, the work-study employer is hiring a student with the understanding that that student is a student first. And so if it's exam week and that student needs to adjust their schedule accordingly, they're hiring the student knowing that they're taking the risk that they're going to have to be flexible with the student's schedule. The other part of it is based on my experience, and that is that with a federal work-study employer, the Department of Education is subsidizing some of a portion of the pay that they're giving to the student. And so as a result of that, the student gets all the money from the employer gets reimbursed from the Department of Ed. But in the end, the employer is only paying 25% of that student's wages. So as a result, I have found that they tend to pay students better. Because if they're paying a student $16 an hour, they're only $4 an hour is going to come out of their budget. COA is cost of attendance. We'll get to that. Sorry about that. Good call. Good to call me out on it. And then it's good to point out also the Ohio College Opportunity Grant and Federal Pell Grant are both prorated based on the student's enrollment. So the students enrolled full-time, they'll get the full amount. If they're enrolled half-time, they're only going to get half the amount. And then beyond that, at the institutional level, there will be grants available. These grants the number of grants, the type of grants, the criteria, the amount, they will all vary greatly from school to school. So there's no normal, okay? Every school is different, but know that would be an option. In terms of loans, these are the main federal loan programs. So we have the top two federal subsidized and unsubsidized loans are loans that are in the student's name. And then the Federal Parent Plus loan, which is a federal loan, but it would be in a parent's name. One of the things that we hear most often is, well, we're not going to complete a FAFSA, we're not going to complete the financial aid application because we make too much money and my son or daughter won't get anything. And the myth of that is, again, regardless of the fact that we might not get what we want to get, every student that completes a FAFSA is at the very least eligible for some combination of federal loans. So if nothing else, by filling out the FAFSA, they would at least have the opportunity to borrow some federal loans. And we're going to talk about what each of those loan types mean. So starting with the two loans that are in the student's name, federal direct subsidized and federal direct unsubsidized loan. The subsidized loan, again, it's a need-based aid source. So again, based on the financial aid application, the Department of Education determines if a student has need, and if so, then that student will be eligible for federal direct subsidized loan money. The biggest difference between the two loans, the subsidized and the unsubsidized loan, is that with the subsidized loan, the Department of Education is subsidizing the interest that accumulates on that loan while the students enroll. The unsubsidized loan will accrue interest from the first disbursement forward, and the student is responsible for repaying whatever interest accumulates during the time until they repay the loan in full. So the easiest way to think about this is, let's say I finished my undergrad, I have $20,000 in loan debt, and it's all unsubsidized loan money. I graduate, I strike it rich, win the lottery, whatever, and I'm able to pay off my loans before my grace period's up, and I just pay them off in full. The only amount that I'm paying back is that $20,000 that I borrowed. That's it. In the same example, by the way, this is purely hypothetical, I paid my loans off in 10 years, over the course of 10 years, and it was more than $20,000. Anyway, back to the example. $20,000, all unsubsidized loan money. In this case, go through the same thing. I strike it rich, win the lottery, I'm able to pay off the loans before I go into officially go into repayment. The amount that I will pay back will be equal to the $20,000 that I borrowed, plus whatever interest has accrued throughout the time that I was enrolled in school. So that's based on that. The best option for a student is the federal direct subsidized loan. Next best would be federal direct unsubsidized loan. The interest rate that's shown here is the current interest rate. Based on trends from the last couple of years, this will likely increase for students that are seniors this year in high school. It won't increase a lot, but any increase is too much in my opinion. It is a fixed variable interest rate, so what that means is that I borrow a loan this year at 5.05%. That single loan will remain at 5.05% from now until I finish paying it off. But then next year, I borrow a loan again, say it's up to 5.1% at that point, then that loan remains at 5.1% through the life of that loan, while my loan I borrowed this year will still be at 5.05. And that's how all of the federal loans work. For federal direct subsidized and unsubsidized loans, the automatic process is that repayment will begin 6 months after the student graduates or drops below a half-time status. So that's important. If for some reason they were to take time off, that means that they drop below that minimum half-time status. Once they either graduate or drop below that half-time status, they will enter what's called a grace period, and that's basically 6 months for the student has to get everything together, including taking their repayment plan, before they actually start repaying the loans. All right? And that is the automatic process for both of these loans. Federal Direct Parent Plus loan. So this is a loan that's in the parent's name. And one thing just to let you all know, I haven't heard it as much lately. It seemed like 5 years ago everybody was saying this. I don't know if there was some bad information that was going out or not. But we have parents that will borrow the Parent Plus loan and they'll say, well, it's okay, once I get into repayment, my son or daughter graduates, I'm just going to put the loan into their name, and then they'll pay it off. But that is not an option, okay? It's never been an option, it will likely never be an option. So the parent is the borrower, one parent is the borrower on the Parent Plus loan, and that loan will remain in their name. It's not able to be switched, okay? With the Federal Direct Parent Plus loan, it's a credit-based loan. So essentially, the Department of Ed, when you're completing the master promissory note, you're giving them permission to run a credit check. They're looking for the presence of adverse credit. And so they're basing a credit decision off of that. You see the interest rate that's up here. So this is something that's one of the biggest changes, in my opinion, since I started in financial aid a while back. And it used to be that subsidized loan was the first best option, unsubsidized loan was second best option, Parent Plus loan was the third best option, and then getting a loan through a bank or credit union or whatever, that was like the last do or die option when no other options were available. To me, that is not the case anymore. And part of it is because of this interest rate. We have more and more, we're seeing parents that say, well, I could get a better interest rate through my bank or through my credit union. And if that's the case, by all means, check it out. Because no longer is it the case that it's those four options in that order. We're seeing more and more where the parents are able to borrow a loan, an education loan, on behalf of their son or daughter, or have their son or daughter borrow an education loan with them as a co-signer through a bank or a credit union, and they're going to get a better interest rate than this. So check it out, explore your options, but know that this is an option. The other big difference with Parent Plus loan is I mentioned that the automatic repayment on a subsidized and unsubsidized loan is 6 months grace period, and then after that 6 months, the student would begin repayment. The automatic process for a Parent Plus loan is that 60 days after the loan disperses, the loan would automatically enter repayment. So essentially, if we're dispersing a loan for a student, our terms start in August and January. So we disperse the fall disbursement, we make the spring disbursement. 60 days after that spring disbursement is made, the loan enters repayment. Now, that's the automatic process. The parent has the option, the borrowing parent has the option when they're completing the master promissory note or at any point by contacting the loan servicer to defer repayment. So it's an option, it's just not the automatic process, just something to be aware of. These are just the general eligibility criteria for a student to be eligible for federal aid. So must be pursuing a degree, credential, certificate program, something else that's approved for aid eligibility. Must be a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen. Valid Social Security number. For male students, they must be registered if they're 18. I think if you're like 17 and 6 months, you can indicate that you want to be registered, but they must, if they're 18, they have to be registered with Selective Service in order to be aid eligible. There is a question on the FAFSA that says, if you're not already registered, do you want us to send your information to Selective Service and have you registered, and the student can choose to do that if they wish. And then for parents that are looking to borrow a Parent Plus loan, they cannot be in default for or owe an overpayment for their own aid. All right, so we talked about this FAFSA, pre-application for federal student aid. How many of you have already started or completed a FAFSA? Look at you guys, I'm impressed. So I asked this last week. So the FAFSA was just available starting yesterday. I don't even know what the date is today. October 1st was when the FAFSA was available. So I was at a school last week and I asked this question. And I felt really bad after I did it because I'm like, how many people have already started the FAFSA? And we had like a couple of people raise their hand and I'm like, stop it! Don't look any further! You're doing the wrong FAFSA! And then I felt bad because I called them out and I put them on the spot. But I'd probably do it again next year. I don't know. We'll see. So you guys, I can't get you like that because it is available. I'm impressed we have some people that have already completed it. You go on with your best self. That's impressive. FAFSA is not required for scholarship consideration for most scholarships. The big thing is, the caveat here is most scholarships. So I would recommend if your son or daughter is not planning on completing a FAFSA that they at least check with the schools that they're considering to make sure that that is the case for those schools, okay? At the University of Cincinnati, we do not require FAFSA for scholarship consideration, but that's not the same at all schools. Again, I indicated that we use the FAFSA filing date to determine eligibility for first come, first served aid. And so it's available now. As soon as possible, have that FAFSA completed, okay? And I will say, I would recommend that you have your son or daughter be a part of this process. And I say that for 2 reasons. First, was last year, I think it was, I was down helping in our one-stop area. Beginning of the school year, we had a pretty big rush of people coming in with questions. And there was a second-year law student. This is a professional student, grad school, second-year law student, and he came in with his mom, and his mom was asking all of the questions. And the student could have cared less if he was there or not. And this is a student that's borrowing like $30,000 for that 1 year to go to school. And so I was trying to be purposeful when the mom would ask me questions. I was trying to be purposeful to turn to the student and answer the questions. And then the mom would ask another question and I'd turn to the student. And finally, I just looked at the student and I said, look, you gotta get involved in this. This is, you're the one that's paying these loans back. And so if you make a wrong decision now, we have students that can't afford to get married, can't afford to have kids, that are living in their parents' basement. And you guys don't want that, right? You don't want to live in your basement until they're 30, come on. So, yeah. I think we got an amen up here, I'm not sure. But I mean, that's the reality, right? So make them a part of the process because in the end, they're the ones that are responsible for whatever decisions are made. The second part of this would be a little selfish for you guys, but I'm telling you, I don't have kids, but if I did, so this is like #life goals that I'm living through you guys, right? So this would be like my ideal situation if I had kids that was going through this. First year, you're sitting together as a family, all gathered around the computer, and you're doing the FAFSA. And you're going through it together, you're walking through, going back and forth, having your student put in their own information. Second year, you are in the living room watching the season premiere of Grey's Anatomy. I don't even really like that show, but it seems to be popular. And I was talking to my mom before I came in. I'm like, why aren't you talking to me? She's like, oh my gosh. And my sister, Erin put up on the season premiere of Grey's Anatomy for me. It's on demand. Like, she couldn't just pause and talk to me, but it's cool. I'm over it. It's all over it. So anyway, go back to the situation. Where was that? All right, so you're in the living room watching the season premiere of Grey's Anatomy or Monday Night Football, for those of you that don't like Grey's Anatomy. And your son or daughter's at the computer. They're filling out the FAFSA on their own, but you're in earshot, so if they have to holler questions into you, they can holler questions in. By the third year, your goal should be that you're in the backyard, around the fire pit, drinking your favorite adult beverage, with your favorite financial aid professional. I'm not saying it has to be me, but my feelings might be hurt if you don't invite me. And I do like a good adult beverage. While your son or daughter's in the house, completing the FAFSA. Right? So this is your mission. Make this your goal by the third year. Okay? Again, if I had kids, I'd be all over this. So I'm challenging you all to this. Make them a part of the process. For selfish and unselfish reasons. There is a process called verification. That's an audit process by the Department of Education. Essentially, students that complete the FAFSA, they can be selected. They used to say, the Department of Ed used to say that it's a random audit. There's no such thing. It's targeted. So essentially, if they see an inconsistency in a student's FAFSA application, they would select the student for verification. The biggest thing is that it just requires the student to submit some additional information. So maybe a verification worksheet, maybe proving whatever income they put on the FAFSA. It's just more of a headache than anything, but it will prevent, in some cases, prevent the student from being awarded financial aid. So just make sure that your son or daughter, just completing the FAFSA sometimes isn't enough. If there are additional things that are being requested or required of them, make sure that they're checking with the schools to make sure that if there is something that's being requested or required, that they get that in as soon as possible as well. All right, so I mentioned completing the master promissory note. In addition to that, we have completing the FAFSA and then also accessing all of the federal aid databases. It used to be that in order to do that, people had to put in a 4-digit PIN number, their social, their name, their date of birth, all this information. And then with the days of internet security, or lack thereof, the Department of Ed said, you know what, we need to make this a little more secure. And so now they have what's called an FSA, Federal Student Aid ID. And so the student has to generate an FSA ID and at least one parent has to generate an FSA ID. And that is what both the student and one parent will use to sign their aid application. So to sign the FAFSA electronically, you're going to use that FSA ID. If a parent is borrowing a Parent Plus loan, they're going to sign the master promissory note using that FSA ID. And so I say at least one parent because only one parent's name is on either, regardless if the parents are married and both parents' income information is included. And so if the parent that signs the FAFSA for one reason or another isn't the parent that's completing the Plus loan application, then both would have to generate their own FSA ID. This is specific to the person, so it's tied to your social security number. So the bad news is this process is treacherous. I'm just keeping it real with you guys. I don't want you to go home and be like, Erica lied to us, because this process is not easy. I'm telling you, it takes a while to do, okay? They'll tell you, everybody will say, don't write down your information. I'm here to tell you, I don't care what you do with that paper afterward, but you better write down your information. The reason being, they ask you like 5 challenge questions too. And if you're like me, like I'm answering these challenge questions and I'm like, oh, favorite vacation spot, like that's never gonna change, right? It's always gonna be Maine. And then I go to answer my challenge questions and I'm like, what do you mean it's not Maine? Oh, I put Disney World. So, I mean, things that you think will never change, and depending on maybe I was feeling stressed one day and not as stressed the next or something. So write down the information, because the only thing worse than going through the process is forgetting what you put and then having to go through and try to retrieve the information. So that's the bad news. The good news, this is kind of like one of the sandwich compliments, like hide the bad in the middle. So the good news is that it's tied to you. So if you're like my parents and they had 3 in college at once, back then of course it was like paper FAFSAs and PIN numbers, but if you're that family, if your family has that situation, the FSA ID is tied to the parent. So your FSA ID that you generate for you is yours forever. So if you have multiple kids in college, you will always be able to use that same FSA ID. You can do, this is the website for the FSA ID is up here. You can do that now. So even if you haven't started your FAFSA, you can go ahead and generate that FSA ID now. So if you think for your sanity purposes that you need to do these 2 processes separately, do the FSA ID first, get that out of the way, and that way you're ready to go once you're ready to complete the FAFSA. All right, so it's really hard to, like, when I'm trying to go through these age years, and the first time I said, like, 2019, 2020, like, that seems so far off. And it's not really, because that's the FAFSA that you all are completing if you have a son or daughter that is currently a senior that will be starting school next year. FAFSA website is here. So this has to be completed every year and for each child in college. So I mentioned we had 3 in college at once. Back in those days, it was paper FAFSA laid across the table and 1 for each of us. And it seemed like it took all day, but I probably was just being soft or complaining or something, I don't know. But it probably didn't take near as long as I thought. So FAFSA every year for each child in college. So the good part about that is you do it once and you're going to be professionals, right? Like it's easy peasy after that. I will say that I used to say if you can read, but I think people took that as a challenge. So now I say if you don't mind reading, or if you're willing to read. This FAFSA process, it can seem really daunting, but it's not. And the reason being is that for every single FAFSA question, if you click in the answer field, there will be tips that will pop up in the margins. And literally in some cases, it'll say, if this is the case, then put this here. Or if you file a 1040, whatever's in line 35 on your 1040, you put that right here. So in some cases, it makes it that easy. In other cases where you're not sure what to put, it will give you tips on what should be included and should not be included. So it does make the process really easy. There is a pre-application worksheet. I don't think that you all need to do that. It does kind of give you an idea of what's expected on the FAFSA, but my opinion is just jump in with both feet, you'll be fine. When it comes to dependency for financial aid purposes, it's considered separate from dependency for tax filing purposes or dependency for what you see as the situation with your family. And there's a lot of regulations in financial aid that are kind of in the gray. Like my favorite is when people are like, oh, I have an easy question. And then like 10 minutes later and it's like, well, if this is the case, this is the answer, and if this is the case, this is the answer, and if neither of those are the case, then this is the answer. It just kind of goes on like that. This is one area that's very black and white, very regulated, okay? Essentially, there's a section, step 3 on the FAFSA, that asks all of these questions. And I'm not going to read these questions to you, but you will see after looking at this that now you'll see how probably 98% of our students have to answer no to all of these questions. And if that is the case, and a student has to answer no to all of these questions, then that student will be considered dependent for financial aid purposes, which means that they have to provide parent information on the FAFSA. So it's literally that cut and dry, okay? And to go along with that, the Department of Ed, this is actually some language that's pulled from the Federal Student Aid Handbook. Essentially, the Department of Ed says, a student living apart from their parents or being self-supporting by itself is not enough to make a student considered independent for financial aid purposes, okay? So, if a student cannot answer yes to any of the questions in the previous screen, regardless of if they don't live with you because they lived on campus or in an off-campus apartment, regardless of if you are, as a parent, planning on providing financial support to them for college, regardless of any of that, their dependency status for financial aid purposes is solely based on those questions, okay? In terms of completing the FAFSA, so these are the materials that are required. This is student and parent demographic section. Beyond that, we're using 2017 tax return information for the FAFSA, okay? So for both the student and the parent, 2017 tax return information. If you've had students in college previously, you think back, you could say, well, it used to be that you just use income information from 1 year previous. That's something that was new a couple of years ago. Essentially, the Department of Ed realized, hey, we're putting these students at a disadvantage if their parents filed an extension or whatever the case is, and so they're selected for verification, they can't provide tax information because in some cases, they're having to wait on their parents to file taxes before they can even file a FAFSA. And so a result of that was that they're now using income information from 2 years previous. So for the 1920 FAFSA, which is what students that are seniors in high school will fill out for their freshman year in college, they're using 2017 tax information, okay? So there is a tool called the IRS data retrieval. Has anybody heard of it? Oh, people. So IRS data retrieval essentially is a tool that will allow you, as you're going through the FAFSA, it'll say, you may qualify for the IRS data retrieval. Do you want to see if you do? You click yes. It'll direct you if you, really the only reasons that you wouldn't, if it's like married but filing separately, that's one situation where you won't be able to utilize the data retrieval because you have two parents' information, two different tax returns for parent information. So that's one of the main reasons. But essentially, if you're able to use the data retrieval, it'll redirect you to the IRS website. You'll basically put in some demographic information so that they know that you are who you say you are. It'll say, okay, we have your information. Do you want us to transfer it onto the FAFSA? You say yes, hit the transfer now button, takes you back to the FAFSA, and the information will be transferred. So for the income section of the FAFSA, that information will be transferred. The caveat for that is that the information will not transfer over as it appears on your tax returns. The numbers will be the same, but you won't be able to tell that. All it's going to say is literally the words transferred from the IRS. And the reason being is that 2 years ago, somebody tried to utilize, it's not funny, but it's kind of ridiculous, so I guess you kind of have to know. Somebody tried to utilize the data retrieval to access President Trump's tax return information. So you guys at least have some notable work sense of humor like I do. All right, it's a true story. So, and it caused like a huge stink. Like they took the data retrieval down, and basically the IRS said we will not make this available until the Federal Student Aid Department, FSA Department, up their security basically. And so they had to go through all these security configurations. So I mean, it's better for us, right? But it was down for almost a year where people couldn't utilize it all because of that. So anyway, it's back up now, but one of the things that they changed to make it more secure is that it will no longer populate with the actual numbers on your end. Now we can see it, we can see what is transferred over, but on your end it'll just say transferred from the IRS. Some people don't like that because they can't actually see the numbers. It's an option, it's not an option that you have to use. I will say that in my experience, students that utilize data retrieval are less likely to be selected for verification, because one of the biggest reasons that a student will be selected for verification is to verify income that's reported on the FAFSA. And if it's transferred directly from the IRS, then the FSA knows that that information is correct. Okay? But it's a choice, so just know that that option is available. One thing that the Department of Ed has done really good, done a lot better at in recent years, is it used to be that they kind of had this FAFSA application and they designed it with the idea that, everybody had the All-American family. And so one thing that they do better now is that they realize that there is no such thing as a traditional family anymore. And so whether it be a same-sex couple or a situation where there are divorced parents or maybe biological parents that are unmarried but living together, they're accounting for all of these types of instances. And so one of the things that we get a lot is, well, if I'm divorced or my parents are divorced, how do we know whose information to put on the FAFSA? And so the Department of Ed kind of has like a step system that they use to identify. Essentially, the first goal is to identify who's the FAFSA parent. Between the two biological parents, who is the FAFSA parent? So in other words, whose information gets put on the FAFSA. So in the case of biological parents, whether they're married or unmarried, if they're living together, then both biological parents' income and biographical or demographic information gets included on the FAFSA. So both of them are considered FAFSA parents. In the case of a divorced parent situation, this is kind of where the tier comes into place. So first tier is the previous 12 months from the date that you're completing the FAFSA. Which parent did the student live with more than half the time? And so in some instances, that alone will clearly define which parent's the FAFSA parent. If the student says, I've lived with both parents equally 50-50, 50% of the time. If that's the case, we go to the next step. The next step is which parent provided more than half of the financial support for the student in the 12 months previous to completing the FAFSA. And so again, we get to that step and we'll have students say, okay, yep, then it's mom's a FAFSA parent or dad's a FAFSA parent. But then we still have students that say, look, I've lived with both parents 50% of the time and they both provide exactly half of my financial support. And so kind of the tiebreaker then, if that's the case, is whichever parent had the highest income in the 12 months previous to completing the FAFSA. Okay, and then that would be the FAFSA parent. And I'll tell you that usually when we get to that third default step, a student will say, I think I might have lived with parent A like 51.2% of the time. Whatever, that's the steps. So determine who the FAFSA parent is. Once we determine who the FAFSA parent is, if that parent is now remarried from their spouse's information as of the date of the FAFSA filing, if they're now remarried, that parent, or that step parent would also put their FAFSA information, or put their information on the FAFSA. Make sense? Clear as mud? Yes? No? I'm getting a lot of looks like that meme I was talking about with the minions. We can talk about this in more detail afterward if you want. Oh, and the last thing on that is, two things. One, if it's a case of if it's a same-sex couple, if they were married in a state that recognizes that, then both parents would have their FAFSA information included. And then adoptive parents are considered legal parents, so in that case they would be the parents that would be included on the FAFSA. All right, these next two slides, essentially I have on here because we got a lot of questions on investments in 529s and how to report it. And so I know it looks like a lot of words, that's because it is a lot of words, but the reason it's on here, and I didn't want to, this is what I would refer to as a power paragraph instead of a PowerPoint. And I usually make fun of people for this, but this is all for you guys. I want you to have this handy, I want you to have it so that you have it handy as you and your son or daughter are completing the FAFSA. Because this will kind of help answer what should be included and what shouldn't be included. On the FAFSA, there is a section for both students and parents that ask for investment information. okay? Net value of investments, or net worth of investments. And so this whole first slide is what should be included. A couple of the things that I want to point out. So real estate, if you have rental real estate, the net value of that should be included as an investment on the FAFSA, not including the home that you live in. So that's something that we get often. CDs, stocks, stock options, money markets, all of that, the net value of those should be included as an investment on the FAFSA. When it comes to 529 plans or other education savings accounts, if the student is required to provide parent information on the FAFSA, so in other words, they're dependent for financial aid purposes, then the value of the 529 account for the student and for anyone else in the household for whom the parents provide support, the net value, or the worth of those 529 plans has to be included as an investment on the parent section of the FAFSA. Okay, so I'll say it again. If it's a student that's required to put parent information on the FAFSA, the 529 plan that they have for the student and for anyone else, any other children in the household for whom they're providing support, the value of all of those collectively have to be reported as a parent investment on the FAFSA. If it is, and that is regardless if the account is in the student's name. If it's a student that's in a situation where they are not required to report parent information, if they have a 529 plan that in their name, they would have to report it as on the student investment section of the FAFSA. Now, I want you guys to flip out here. So, this is a caveat, a little nugget for you to take with you, because I hear people will say, well, so we're getting penalized essentially for planning ahead. So you talk about these, 86% or the 39%, or on the flip side of that, the 61%, the 75% of statistics I made up on the spot. I don't even know if the numbers I just said are correct. So anyway, I talk about these people that don't have a plan, and we made a plan, and now we're being penalized for it because we have to report it on the FAFSA. I will tell you that you are better off having made a plan. There's this huge calculation that determines what a student's FAFSA results are. This investment section for the parent is a very, very, very small portion of that huge calculation. Okay? So it does not have a big bearing on the end result. So you do have to report it, but you're not being penalized to do so. Okay? What does not need to be included? So all of these things do not need to be included. I'm not going to read them. The biggest is that we get questions on are retirement plans from 401ks, things like that, pensions. Those do not need to be reported as an investment. Okay? Investments also do not include uniform gift to minor and uniform transfer to minor accounts, for which you're the custodian but not the owner. I'm going to be honest with you. This is a keep it real moment. I don't even really know exactly what those are, but I figured if you don't know what they are, you probably don't have one, so the question's not applicable, as is the case for me. If it's a 529 that is owned by someone other than the student or parent, so in this case, let's say a grandparent has a 529 for a student. If that is the case, regardless of if the student has to report parent information, if it's a 529 that's owned by someone other than the student or the parent, it should be reported as money paid or received on the student's behalf, which is another question on the FAFSA, which is separate from the investing section. Okay? Gibbers?
So I have these transaction procedures. If I have an account in her name that I've been investing in, she needs to know for her FAFSA.
Yep. But she's only reporting the value of what is the distribution from that. So in the first scenario where it's like you have a 529 for your son or daughter, you're reporting the full value of the 529. In this scenario where you have a 529 for, say, your niece, she's only reporting as money paid or received on her behalf the value of whatever is dispersed from that 529 for that given year.
Thank you.
And again, the way things are weighted in the calculation to determine a student's financial aid eligibility, it takes all of that into consideration. So the reason that it's the value of the disbursement rather than the value of the whole thing is because of the weights and essentially it just evens everything out, okay? There's a very small exclusion for a business. So essentially, if somebody has a business that meets this criteria, so that they or their family own majority of the business, they have 100 or less than 100 full-time employees, they don't need to report the value of that business as an investment. That's the only exclusion, so either they meet it and they don't report it, or they don't meet it and they do report it. Again, it's net value, so take away the whatever debt you have on your business as well. In the end, FAFSA is called the free application for federal student aid for a reason, because it's free. So please, please, please do not pay anyone to file a FAFSA for you. I won't even charge you to help you fill out a FAFSA, okay? Please do not. There are so many opportunities for you to have somebody help you if you feel like this is too overwhelming, that you should never have to pay someone. And you're gonna have people that'll say, we'll help you to file, we'll charge you this much and we'll file your FAFSA for you. Please do not pay anyone to help you file a FAFSA. Here's a website for you to go to. This is sponsored through our state professional association. Essentially, there are events across the state where they will have FAFSA completion nights that are open to the public. My staff alone, we're doing 17 completion events. Between our first one was last night, and we'll have 17 between last night and the third week in October. We're doing 17 of these, okay? There are opportunities available. All of them that are on this site are open to the public and they're free. And in many cases, you'll have one-on-one help with a financial aid professional with the FAFSA. There's also some good resources and tools on there, so check it out. Have your son or daughter check it out. There's some corny videos, all that good stuff. Oh, there you go. All right, so got all that out of the way. So then what happens next, right? You complete the FAFSA. I talked about this big formula. It's called a needs analysis formula, essentially. It's kind of like the rite of passage when you're getting into financial aid, where they make you do one of these calculations by hand. And I'm serious when I tell you it takes like an hour. So this is a convoluted formula. The good news is they do it all behind the scenes electronically, so we don't have to do that anymore. But the result of that needs analysis formula is something called an EFC, or an expected family contribution. I hate this name, expected family contribution. I hate it. It's a misnomer to me. I've tried to tell them that I hate it, but they don't listen to me. It's a misnomer because just because a student has a 0 EFC doesn't mean that they're not going to have to contribute anything towards their education. Just because someone has a $50,000 EFC doesn't mean they're going to be expected to contribute $50,000 towards their education. So I say that to say to you all, to you, it should just be a number. Wait until you get the bottom line from the universities and use that number. Don't think too much about this EFC. For us, in most instances, it'll tell us exactly what kind of aid the student's eligible to receive. For the federal program, for instance, we get a chart from the Department of Ed. It literally says, this is the student's EFC and this is their enrollment status, this is how much federal program money they get, okay? So for us, it means something. For you all, just take it as a number, because to me it is a misnomer. But we take this EFC, and from that, we're determining that need that I talked about, where the Department of Education is saying if you have need or not, the student has need or not, we're determining that. And from the FAFSA, the student and the parent get an output document, so it's called the Student Aid Report, or a SAR. The institutions that the student chooses to have receive their FAFSA results also gets kind of an institutional version of that SAR, and then we're going to use that and the information that's on it to determine a student's financial aid eligibility. Okay? Jeez Louise. They don't teach you how to use a clicker in financial aid. All right, so we get this financial aid, we get the SAR information, we award the student financial aid, we send the financial aid award offer to the student in various ways. Sometimes it's printed, sometimes it's online, sometimes it's via email, whatever the case. All different schools are going to be very different. The student gets a financial aid award offer. Someone asked earlier, what's COA? So COA is cost of attendance. Cost of attendance is made up of two types of costs, so direct costs and indirect costs. I always like to think of the COA as everything from tuition to toothpaste. So there are charges, such as tuition that you know you're going to have. That will be on it because it's on a bill. But there are also charges that you know that a student is going to incur, and this is where the toothpaste part comes in, which I guess we hope that they need toothpaste, because I know that they're using it. But tuition and toothpaste, all of these charges, whether they're billed or not, are charges that we can assume that a student will incur as part of being a college student, right? And so when we talk about the charges that are in the bill, we're talking about direct costs. Tuition and fees, room and board if the student's living on campus. When we talk about indirect costs, we're talking about those costs such as toothpaste that we can expect that a student will incur, but that won't necessarily be billed, okay? Direct costs are generally pretty standard depending on if the student's living on campus, what dorm they're living in, you know, what program they're in, whatever. Indirect costs can vary. If I have my own car, my transportation expenses, which would be considered an indirect cost, would be different than someone who's maybe riding a bus, okay? In the end, know that both of these types of expenses are going to incur, okay? That report that I referred to earlier, there was the single indirect cost that people were most surprised at. So like almost half the people, I think 40% of the families that were surveyed were like blown away that this was an indirect cost. So this was, to them, it was an unexpected cost. I think I know what it is. If I want to take a guess? Oh, you guys are smart. Did you cheat? Oh, did I put it in? No, I don't think it's on there. All right, so it's books, right? So 40% of families said that they were not expecting books to be an expense. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and maybe say they weren't expecting it to be such an expense, because I've been there and done that, and it is quite an expense. So anyway, it is an expense. It might not be on the bill. In most cases, it won't be, but it is an expense. But essentially, the significance of this cost of attendance budget is for every student, based on which categories they fall into for direct and indirect costs, we build a budget for them. That cost of attendance budget, it's the bottom line that represents the maximum amount of financial aid from any source, scholarships, grants, loans, whatever, that a student can receive in that age year, okay? So when you have people that say, is there a maximum amount of aid they can receive? That's the amount, whatever the cost of attendance budget amount is, that's their max amount. This is kind of I just put this together to kind of be a comparison for you all. And it's more, this is very stereotypical example, but I did it that way on purpose. These amounts are completely made up, and I did it that way on purpose as well. But I wanted, because I mentioned that financial aid award offers are going to look different at every school, I wanted you all to kind of have a visual example of that. So I'm not going to harp on this too much, but in this example, College A is a 4-year public university. College B is a 4-year private, and College C is a community college, okay? And so a couple things that I'm going to point out. You see that the expected family contribution is the same regardless of the school. So while one school might cost more than another, even if it's significant, that expected family contribution, and keep in mind, is derived from the FAFSA, which is the same results get sent to every school, okay? So in this case, the expected family contribution is the same across the board. And we see the differences in tuition. So traditionally speaking, I think I said that backwards. A is a 4-year private, B is a 4-year public. You guys are freaking out, sorry. I saw the look I was getting. So traditionally speaking, 4-year privates are more expensive than 4-year publics, which are more expensive than 2-year community colleges. And so in this example, you see the difference in tuition. You see there's not much of a difference in room and board between public and private. And that's because that, regardless of where you go, that amount can differ, but it's always going to be around the same amounts, okay? So you don't see too much of a difference between public and private universities with room and board charges. In this example, there's no room and board charges for community college because in most cases, community colleges are considered commuter campuses and don't offer on-campus housing. So we get down to total costs. So these are the total direct costs, tuition and fees, room and board. And then the next line is total cost of attendance. And you see that that amount is different. Total cost is just the direct cost. Cost of attendance is the toothpaste part of tuition and toothpaste. That includes the direct and the indirect costs, okay? So that's why those amounts are different. We go down to the types of aid offered. Traditionally, 4-year private institutions have better endowments, and for that reason, they're able to award more scholarship money. So traditionally, students will have, and again, this is it's comparable. So traditionally, they cost more, but they can give more in the form of scholarships. Grants. can differ school to school, as I mentioned. Again, they might be, a four-year private might be able to give a little bit more grant money because of the endowment funding that they have, but it's not going to be as much of a difference than scholarships usually are. And then in loans, you're going to see the loan amount is the same. So that loan amount, this is loan amount in the student's name. So as a freshman dependent student, regardless of what school they attend, the Department of Ed says they can borrow up to $5,500 of loan money in their own name. Up to $3,500 of that can be in the form of a subsidized loan. But max amount, regardless if it's $3,500 sub and $2,000 unsub, or all $5,500 in unsub. Regardless, every student can only get up to $5,500 in loan money in their own name as a freshman dependent student. Okay? So we look at total aid amount and then subtract that from the total cost, and you see the total out of pocket. So depending on what choice the student makes, they could have a gap of $15,500, in which case they would look at a Parent Plus loan or look at an alternative loan or other means such as the 529 plan, payment plan, whatever. Or in some cases, if they choose a cheaper college option, they may have a credit that they could use for expenses related to being a student. Say if they need a car to get to campus, then they could use that refund money to get a car, or they could turn that money back in and decrease the amount that they're actually borrowing. Okay? All right, so where do we go from here? Students should be very careful to review the financial aid and admissions information for each of the schools that they're considering. The biggest is to meet all application deadlines. So if they have a priority FAFSA date, if they have a priority consideration for scholarships, students need to be aware of what those dates are so that they don't miss them. In addition, especially admissions applications are going to require students to submit some additional documentation. And I'm just helping Mark out here by saying that if the school is requiring, which I'm sure they will, transcripts, there'd be a letter of recommendation. These counselors are going to be inundated with those requests the closer that we get to those due dates, those deadlines. So the priority deadline for scholarship consideration for UC is December 1st. November 1st, December 1st is pretty common. So the closer that they get to those dates, students are going to be submitting requests, and those pile up, right? And if each student's looking at 7 schools, which is probably on the low end, they're having to do this for that one student 7 times. And so if a student waits until the week before Thanksgiving to submit the request and the school has a December 1st deadline, the chances are that the counselor is not going to have enough time to get that. Chances are great that the counselor will not be able to get that information in on time, okay? So have your son or daughter make sure they know what the dates are and then plan ahead to make sure that they have plenty of time for them and whoever else they're relying on getting information submitted on their behalf. And then investigating other sources of aid. And so of course, the biggest of those would be scholarships. And scholarships can come from the institution, they can come from private entities. More often than not, these scholarships are based on merit, so ACT, SAT scores, GPA, those sorts of things. The biggest thing is that each college is going to have their own criteria, including, as I mentioned, priority deadline for scholarship consideration. And regardless of if your son or daughter is a junior or a senior, it's never too early or too late to start looking for private scholarship options, okay? And so I will give some links for private scholarships. So everything, in a minute I'll provide that information, but everything that we've talked about up to this point is not specific to UC. This is the only slide in this whole presentation that's specific to UC, okay? So regardless of what schools your son or daughter is considering, everything that we've talked about is applicable, all right? And that's why I've tried to say, you know, where there are cases where information would vary school to school, I've tried to make that a point, all right? This is the only slide that is specific to UC, and this is some specific UC scholarship information. So our flagship scholarship program for incoming freshmen is called the Cincinnati Scholarship. The award amounts range from $1,500 a year to a full ride. We actually had a full ride. Our full ride is the Cincinnati Presidential Scholarship, and I believe this past year, this is the student is a freshman right now. We had a full ride Presidential Scholar from Sycamore. Got a head shake back there. Yep. We had 2. Did you say 2?
We had 2, but only 1 went.
Oh, okay, well, 2, I mean, we give out like 12 a year, so, and it's people all over the United States, so to say that there were 2 from Sycamore, that's a huge deal. I think there's been one other time in my 10 years at UC we had 2 from the same school. So that's a big deal, but we give these scholarships everywhere from $1,500 to a full ride. In addition, we have departmental scholarships, so each of the colleges have their own pot of money that they offer academic scholarships from. The bottom line is that we have a December 1st priority deadline. So students have to have their admissions application completed and submitted to the admissions department. They have to have their high school transcript sent directly from the high school to the admissions office, and they need to have their test scores sent directly from ACT or College Board to the University of Cincinnati. And all of that has to be received by December 1st. The good news, if a student meets that December 1st deadline, they will be considered for not only the Cincinnati scholarship, but also for scholarships from all the other departments and offices on campus. The bad news is if a student misses that December 1st deadline, they will not be considered for scholarships from any of those sources. And I will tell you, I've been at UC 10 years. I have built a lot of valuable relationships, and I've kind of worked my way up from when I started as an advisor. And there are a lot of ways in which I have some influence and some pull. This is not one of those ways. And every single year, I have to sit down with the family. It never fails. I have to sit down with the family, and it's a family whose son or daughter has literally done everything possible. They've done everything right. They failed to make the December 1st deadline. And I have to sit with that family and say, look, you've done everything right since you were in kindergarten. You've made all the best choices, you have the best grades, you have all of the best of everything. But there's nothing that I can do to get you scholarship consideration because you missed this December 1st deadline. And that is single-handedly the hardest conversation that I have to have. And I have to have it every year. So, December 1st, December 1st, December 1st. For UC, for any school that your son or daughter is considering, make sure that they know what those deadlines are so that they don't miss them, okay? We have some information on our website. We actually have a search for scholarships page. So if you go on the financial aid website, you can click on the search for scholarships. Essentially, anybody outside organizations nationwide that sends us scholarship offers for students, we vet it to make sure that it's legit. If it's legit, we put it online. So it's always changing. Things are coming down as scholarship applications are past due, and then new ones are going up every day. Okay, so that's one site. There are a couple of other, FastWeb and College Board and Scholarship America are all national websites for scholarship search tools. So lots and lots and lots of opportunities, but lots and lots of people that are also looking at those opportunities and applying for those as well. And then Cincinnati Scholarship Foundation is a local one. Do you guys have like milestones or something here? What do you guys have? Do you have a scholarship?
Our scholarship information is located on our counseling website.
Okay.
So there's local scholarship information and, as well as national scholarship information, links, different resources.
Okay, cool. So obviously all the resources that you talked about, any type of civic organization to which you or your son or daughter belongs, those are always good options to check and see if they have scholarships available. And then libraries, there's books that are just full of scholarship opportunities. And then the schools that your son or daughter is considering, have them ask those schools, counselors at those schools, admissions counselors, financial aid personnel, whoever, what scholarship opportunities are available, okay? All right, so I know you guys are tired of hearing me talk. I'm tired of hearing myself talk. So this is my last slide. I'll have some contact information for you, and then I'll be ready to take some questions. But these are, if you're asleep, please wake up. These are like my parting words for you, okay? So if you remember nothing else, please remember these things. First, a university's price tag should not be a deciding factor in whether or not the student applies. And I will, for as long as I'm in financial aid and probably after, I will preach this. And anytime I have the opportunity to talk to high school guidance counselors, I will say, please, please, please never discourage a student from applying to university just because of the cost of that university. And I'm so passionate about this, and it's because of personal experience. So, I mentioned we had 3 in college at one time in my family. I have a twin sister, and I'm the better twin. I have a twin sister, and then I have a sister that's 16 months older. Okay, I also have a brother, he didn't go to college. So the three of us were in college at once. So my dad worked for the city of Cincinnati. My mom did not work outside the home. She was a teacher that once she started having kids, she stayed at home. So we weren't exactly rolling in the cash there. It was when I was in high school that I came home one day and I'm like, Mom, did you know we were poor? It wasn't until that point that I realized we were poor. I guess that was a good thing though. That means they did something right. So we had 3 in college at once, and so when I applied to schools, I kind of narrowed it down to 3 schools. I had a private institution out of state, I had a private institution in Northwest Ohio, and I had a large urban public research university in the city of Cincinnati. I don't want to name names here. So those are my 3 schools that I narrowed it down to, okay? So out-of-state school, private institution it was actually where my sister attended. My older sister went there. So right off the bat, we had a siblings discount, half the tuition rate, got some academic monies. So it was probably 3 times the cost of the local option that I had. But in the end, I was probably a fifth of what it was going to cost me to go to the local option. The bottom line is going to be like a fifth of the amount, okay? That's not, I was able to take out some student loan money to cover what it would have been. So then my next option was the private institution in Northwest Ohio. And so there the cost was about double what it was to stay local. And mind you, staying local meant I was going to live at home too. So even counting that I would have to live on campus at these other institutions. So Northwest Ohio, I had some academic monies. I was offered a scholarship to play softball, so a Division II scholarship. And in the end, it cost me about $400 more to go there than it would have cost to go to the institution out of state. But it's still significantly cheaper than it would be to stay home, okay? So had my parents just based on the price tag alone, knowing that we couldn't afford it, and essentially every penny that we made we had to save to go towards our education. Had they discouraged me from applying to those other 2 institutions, I would have never, I ended up choosing the school in Northwest Ohio. I was able to play softball, which in itself, playing intercollegiate athletics was an experience. Taught me so much, I felt like I grew as a person. But I finished playing softball, and before I left, before I graduated, I was approached by the head coach, and he said, hey, I'm going to have a graduate assistantship that will open up next fall. Would you be interested? And he said, you would coach, and we'll pay for you to go to grad school. Oh, and we're going to pay for you, we're going to give you a place to live, we're going to give you a meal plan, and if you work these 2 camps, we're going to pay for all your books. So what started out as an option that was 2 times more expensive than the local option got me through undergrad with a very enriching experience at a university that I'm still involved with from an alumni standpoint to this day. It got me a second family, a family away from home, and it got me my graduate degree. And I guarantee I'd have never been able to afford to go to graduate school right out of college because I felt the pressure to come back and get a job and start making money. So because of that, I will preach till I'm blue in the face. Please do not discourage someone from applying because of the cost of the university. Now, with that being said, you get to the bottom line, and if it's out of reach, then you can start preaching to the student that that's not going to be an option. But don't discourage them on the front end because you never know, okay? Award letters are going to look different. Not only are they going to look different, they're going to arrive at very different times. So, I mentioned that, some people are like, well, I've been waiting to get my award offer in the mail and it hasn't come. Well, they're going to be waiting a long time because we don't send any award offers out through the mail. It's on the student's online portal, and that's how they access it for the University of Cincinnati. Some schools will still send it out in the mail. Some students will just get a notification. Some students will get it via email. Some students will just get a notification via email to tell them to go online. Every school is going to send out, so not only will it look different, not only will the types of aid and the amounts look different, the delivery source will be different, and the timing will be different. So your son or daughter will probably start getting their first award offer maybe November. And there are probably schools that they won't get an award offer from until March. And as a family, that can be very frustrating, very nerve-wracking, very stress-inducing. But when the FAFSA became available sooner, which was a couple years ago when I mentioned the change in the tax year of income that we were using, at that point the FAFSA moved up from January to October. And essentially there are schools that are still using their same awarding time frame regardless of the fact that the FAFSA is available 3 months sooner. Because from a cost standpoint, they don't have the resources to be able to change their programming and work with their vendor to get everything, there's a whole lot of behind the scenes things that happen. So just know that the student will get a financial aid award offer. It will just vary from time to time. The good news is that the national confirmation time is not until May 1st. So even if it is March and the students get nervous about deciding where they're going to go, at least they still have a month or so to decide. And as a right and as a family's right, you have the right to know when to expect a financial aid award offer. So if you have questions, if your son or daughter has questions, have them call. The worst that they're going to hear is it's not available yet, it won't be available until February, until March. But at least then they know what to expect, right? And that's your right to know. So call and ask. Please don't be one of the 40% that has expenses that are unexpected. I told you all it's tuition and toothpaste. When I do this presentation next year, I don't want to be talking about you when I'm talking about the 40% of people that have books as an unexpected expense. So just know that there will be unexpected expenses. Have your son or daughter keep that in mind and then plan accordingly, okay? Last but not least, so we mentioned that financial aid eligibility is based on tax information from 2 years ago, so 2017 tax information for students that are seniors this year. We also understand that as a family there are things that can happen that will make it so that the information that's reported on the FAFSA is not an accurate reflection of the family's ability to pay. So whether it's a loss of job, whether it's a change in income, whatever the case is, these circumstances happen. And so there's a process that's called a professional, different schools will call it different things, but it'll either be called a professional judgment or a special circumstance appeal. If you and your family has a situation that you think warrants kind of a second look, have your son or daughter call each of the schools that they're considering or email each of the schools that they're considering and ask what their professional judgment or special circumstance appeal process is and how they go about initiating that. Essentially, this process is a Department of Education process that allows the institution to take a look at what the current financial situation is and use those numbers to decide what a student's financial aid eligibility is in place of what's on the FAFSA. You would still complete the FAFSA, your son or daughter would still complete the FAFSA using actual numbers from 2017 tax information. But then after that, you would go through a special circumstance appeal process and we would make adjustments to the student's eligibility based on whatever those new figures are. All right, I'm going to leave our contact information up here. Bottom line, my staff consists of financial aid advisors. We do not ask people when they call whether or not their son or daughter is considering UC. If you have a question, your son or daughter has a question, and you're not able to get the answer that you need, regardless if they're considering UC or not, give us a call. Worst case scenario, we can say, this is how we do it here, but it could be different school to school. Best case scenario is we're going to be able to give you a straight answer because whatever your question is, it's the same across the board regardless of what schools, okay? We don't get into financial aid for the money. Believe me, we don't get into financial aid for money. Especially financial aid at a public institution, we don't get into for the money. All right, we get into it because we have a passion for what we do and for helping students and families make the best decision possible for their family, okay? So if you have a question, your son or daughter has a question, please email, call us. If you're in the area, stop in. We take people on a walk-in basis 8 to 5 Monday to Friday, but we'll be happy to help answer your questions for you. With that being said, I know we have time to take a few questions from the audience. I also know that there are instances where you don't want to put your business out there, and I respect that, so I will hang around afterward, even after we're done taking questions from the big group to address those specific student circumstances or questions that you have. All right, what questions? Yep.
I used to work at finance
Oh, thank you. Give this lady a mic, I'm just kidding. No, go ahead. I'm messing. It's just because she said I did a good job. So the question is, just hypothetically speaking, if a student completes a FAFSA and say they go to an out-of-state school for the fall term and then decide they want to come back in-state or to another institution, transfer to another institution for the spring, how do they transfer their aid? So the FAFSA that you complete is for the academic year, so fall, spring, summer, or if summer is the beginning, then summer, fall, spring. So on the FAFSA, the student can choose up to 10 schools that they want to receive their FAFSA results. Say that a student goes to Ohio State, and then, so Ohio State's one of the schools that they choose to get their FAFSA results. They get their financial aid information, they stay there for the term, and then they want to transfer back to an institution close to home. If the school that they're transferring back to is not on their FAFSA as one of the schools, the student would go in and choose to make a correction on that FAFSA and add the school code for that school that they want to transfer to. By adding the school code, the school would then get the FAFSA results. Some schools, every school does it different. For instance, at UC, as long as the student has an offer of admission, we will award an offer of admission and a FAFSA on file, we will award a financial aid award offer to them. Some schools require a confirmation. It just depends what the school's policy is, but yeah, then you just add the FAFSA, the school code on the FAFSA for the school to which the student is transferring if they don't already have it on there. Mm-hmm. Part B, go ahead.
Actually, it's going to be different, but this is new, since I was there. And, you said they were going back.
There you go.
2 years prior to the federal tax information. Just trying to get better understanding for the parent that the child lives with the most. And then that, the past 12 months, that's one of the county, but, how does the one parent, say the opposite parent, claim their child?
All right,
How does that play into?
so the question is, if one parent claimed the child as an exemption on their taxes in, say, 2017, but as of the day the FAFSA is being completed, the student's living with parent B more than half the time. Keep in mind that financial aid or dependency status for financial aid purposes is separate, completely separate and unrelated to dependency status for tax purposes. So regardless of who claimed that student on their tax returns, that tiered approach is still the approach that you use to determine which parent's information should be put on the FAFSA. So in this case, if student lived with parent A more than half the time from the 12 months previous to the date that they're completing the FAFSA, that would be the parent whose financial information gets put on the FAFSA.